We're live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to PaizoCon 2019. This is the panel talking about moving on from the Pathfinder Playtest, moving on to 2nd edition. So today we're going to be talking a bit about what we learned from the playtest, what we discovered by running probably what is the largest playtest to ever happen in the RPG industry, and what we took and used to move on to 2nd edition. Hi, I'm the Director of Game Design. I'm Jason Bullman. I'm going to pass it down the line here and let everybody introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Stephen Radley McFarlane, Senior Game Designer at Paizo.
I am Mark Seifter, and if we're putting game in there, I'm a Game Designer at Paizo.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm Logan Bonner. I am a designer at Paizo.
That is our real title.
Because I like to have the mystery.
Well, we just
of what I design.
What are you designing? That's something.
We're not graphic designers.
No, we're not.
I still get a lot of email about that, being like,
yeah.
would you like the newest, fonts? And I'm like, no. All right, anyway.
I feel like Logan could do your graphic design.
No, that's right, yeah.
Logan's got some graphic design chops. Yeah.
So what we're going to be doing here today is we're going to be talking a bit about the process that took us from the playtest to the final. We're going to talk about some of the results we got, and then we're probably going to open it up for questions, both to people here in the room and to those of you on Twitch. So why don't we get started with where this all began, which was like, God, 3 years ago.
Yeah, I don't remember
about
that
that.
far
4 years ago.
It was 4.
When the entire process began, one of the first decisions that we made, because we've been doing this for years, is we knew we were going to start with a gigantic playtest. It worked great for us with Pathfinder 1st Edition, and when it came to 2nd Edition, we knew that the fans would want to give us their feedback, let us hear their minds, and what they wanted out of a new edition of the game. But I think early on, we decided that this playtest had to be a little different. It couldn't be the same sort of playtest we normally did. For those of you who maybe participated in some of our earlier playtests for like the Advanced Player's Guide, or Ultimate Combat, or Ultimate Wilderness, basically what those were is we would release classes and be like, play with them and tell us what you think. Mm-hmm. And that makes for a fun experience, but it's not very rigorous scientific data. It's mostly anecdotal, because we don't know what you're playing, we don't know what levels you're playing at, we don't even know if you actually even are playing. You could just be reading the class and tell us what you think. And there's value in that data, there really is. But it doesn't let us stress test the system. It doesn't let us see where things are working and where they're not working. So one of the early decisions that we made was to apply some scientific rigor to this one. And I think, who did I assign to that? I assigned Mark. I assigned you to help do a lot of the early research on that. Why don't you talk a little bit about kind of some of the first things we decided?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I guess as the group's resident scientist, it made sense for me to do the scientific research, because I came from a computer science background. And so therefore I want to stress to all of you who are also from a science background that when Jason said we applied more scientific rigor, by no means did we apply thorough, fully scientific rigor. Anyone
Double-blind testing.
Anyone who is
White
in
lab
the playtest,
very important,
who has done a real peer-reviewed research knows that just the fact that the survey was opt-in has already made it so that it's not fully scientific. But we knew going in that was what we were going to get.
But we did first test it on mice.
We tested on mouse guard players.
Yes, that's right. We tested it on mice, and we found that
they're terrible role players.
At least 80% of them did not go on the internet and complain about the game, which we thought was pretty good.
We like these mice.
Yeah. So we wanted, knowing that there was always going to be a selection bias, so that we can't scientifically prove anything about everyone or all fans who played the game. We knew that we could scientifically prove things about the set of people who self-selectedly answered our surveys. And that's what Jason means. We decided to be as rigorous as we could, knowing that it wasn't going to be fully accurate, that it was going to be accurate to the people who were willing to answer the survey. So what we did was I basically went on a quest to read a bunch of papers that were free or other things that were online about modern survey science, and we tracked down certain best practices, such as using a Likert scale, which if you took the survey. Who here did any of the surveys?
Who here took
At
some
least
of our
one.
surveys?
Oh,
Well,
wow.
awesome.
Okay, so a Likert scale is extremely X, very X, somewhat X, not so X, not at all X. Do you remember seeing that a lot? Research shows that that is going to make it easier for you to tell us your preferences and give us the full 5 scale than if we were like, very great, somewhat great, it's okay, not so great, or pretty bad, very bad, which you might have seen.
I think the thing is we had to avoid anything that only had 4.
Yes.
Because that inherently has a bias, either positive or negative. And we had to avoid any language, and this is especially true in questioning, that was suggestive of an answer.
Right.
We had to relearn how to ask questions. And yeah, you did a
you
lot
can't
of,
say,
yeah.
did you like this encounter?
Yeah.
Because then there's a bias towards some people are taking it to say that they liked it. Or did you find this encounter too challenging? Then they would bias to say they did. Whatever you asked. That's exactly what Jason was saying there. So with a Likert scale, you don't have, the problem is if you do 4 options, you force people who are kind of ambivalent to go up or down. 2 options, if you've ever seen like Steam or anywhere else that you can only thumbs up or thumb down, you have a lot of problems when you have only 2 options and you lose a lot. 5 gives you a lot of gradation, but if you do a neutral option, you wind up with too many people picking it. And so with a Likert scale, that's just one thing. I'm not going to go into anything else because I just feel that was the most fundamental one. We really got a wide variety of answers from you guys. We saw answers all the way from extremely X to not at all X. And basically, we were able to use that information and some of the other survey sciences and tools that we had on SurveyMonkey in order to cross-reference people. It's like, well, the people who said that they really didn't like the game, but what did they think about this option? Oh, wow, they liked this thing that was in it. But so we basically were trying to be a little bit more scientific, and the surveys, I think, exceeded far beyond my expectations. Already, I was thinking that the surveys were going to help us. And obviously, these guys have been here for more of the playtests at Paizo. I've been here since they called Adventures Playtest. This was by far and away, you guys did an amazing job. This was the best data, the best playtest information, the best refinement that we've ever been able to do on a playtest by an order of magnitude.
Yeah, there was a point where I almost felt like I was drowning in data. Like in our previous playtest,
And some
it was
of you
like,
probably did as well.
Yeah, you were drowning in questions,
Yes.
right? And and for those of you who toughed it out and made it through all of it, or even made it through the majority of it, thank you. Like, that data was really invaluable, and we'll get into some ways that.
And we saw a significant drop-off over the course of things, which we expected, but we still had a significant amount of data.
Yeah, there were certain numbers that I wanted to make sure we hit to have kind of statistical relevancy. Like, if only 10 people take a survey, that data's not worth a damn. But, we had hundreds, and in some cases thousands of people take various stages of these surveys. And that, even though it's self-selecting, you start going, well, we're now getting to a reasonable percentage of the audience. So we have to be at least heading in toward data that we can start to trust.
We still can't say anything about the total audience.
But
we can say for sure out of the audience of anyone who was willing to take in the playtest, and for instance, of the people who did the first survey, we can say things about the later surveys, even though they didn't have everyone. So talking about the drop-off, my favorite thing is, who do you think dropped off later on in the survey? Don't say it out loud, but my guess is that you probably think it's people who rate answers similar to you, because everyone on the message boards who was very positive is like, oh, the positive people stopped answering the surveys, and the people who were giving negative answers, I bet the negative people just didn't have fun and didn't answer the surveys. The ones who didn't answer the surveys and who stopped answering were the ones who tended to rate things quite positively, but not extremely. They were like, this is very good, very satisfied, very good, very fun. 4 out of 5, essentially. They were kind of like, okay, yeah, this is good. They don't have to change too much. I'm pretty happy. I'm not that invested. I'll come back next year. The extremely satisfied stayed, and all the people who were low wanted to stay because they wanted to make a change. So you can figure it out now that I've told you, but a lot of people were thinking, it's me, my type of people left. That's why they're getting less sample from that. But actually, it was the people who were quite happy, but not totally the most extreme evangelists.
So we decided that we wanted to perform a test that had at least something that we could measure, right? And I think, as we were building the game and as we were putting together some of those early pieces, we had to try and figure out a way to do that. And it's a challenge because you can't just hand out the game and say, play it and then fill out these surveys, because GM style might be different, number of players might be different. There's so many different variables in there. Oh yeah, we decided to run this old OP or AP, or the group who's like, yeah, we ran a homebrew in Forgotten Realms and it was crazy. I think it can go so many different ways that one of the things that we identified very early on is that we had to remove some of the randomness from the process. We had to at least get everyone playing the same adventure. That way we had a baseline. So everybody's playing these same encounters over and over and over again. Let's ask questions about them, because at least then we kind of could gauge how various parts of it were working, and we could create sections that were in essence tests.
Yep.
And each one of us wrote various parts of the test. We had some help from some other authors at Paizo as well, and he's
Like James J.
he's fleeing from the room before we can put a mic on him.
And Amanda?
Yeah, and Amanda. So I think it's good for us to kind of chat about each one of these tests in particular. We'll lay all our cards on the table now that it's all said and done, and just cut down to brass tacks. So first of all, how many of you played through the whole thing? A fair number of you.
Bravo.
All right, yeah. How many of you at least got like halfway? Somewhere there. All right, yeah, all right.
Who played Lost Star and stopped?
Nobody.
Nobody. Okay.
All right, everybody made it past Lost Star. And that's really
Put that
interesting.
in the data.
But statistically, if you weren't the people in this room who came to PaizoCon, statistically you might have.
Well, see, and this is the point of one of the points of how statistics can lie to you.
Yep.
You might look at that and go, wow, everybody played through the first one. Well, except for the fact that all of you have self-selected as some of the biggest Paizo fans out there.
Yep.
You all deserve a huge round of applause, which means, of course, you played through the first part and made it to the second, because you guys are all awesome. But no, I
Don't feel
think,
bad if you haven't played it all, because we didn't.
yeah.
Still
Oh yeah. And if you didn't raise your hand because you didn't even play the first part, we know who you are.
We got your IP address.
Yeah.
cookies.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the testing objectives here. Obviously, we were trying to build a game that had a lot of robust moving parts. We wanted to, change a lot of things about Pathfinder. Some things that we were learning weren't quite working the way we had hoped. I think one of the biggest ones of those was the way that the fractional math worked in first edition. Eventually ended up with real discontinuity of play. If you started out at first level, you got worse at certain saving throws percentage-wise as you went up, because the save went up at a pretty reasonable clip, but yours stayed behind, so you actually got worse. Yeah. It was like counterintuitive to the playing experience, so we knew we had to change up some of those things, and we wanted to find ways that we could test some of our new assumptions about the math, some of our new assumptions about the way the game plays, and some of our new assumptions, or rather, some of our assumptions about how those things wouldn't affect how the game actually felt. And that was key. So that was actually testing goal number one. For the Lost Star, the goal there was literally, when playing this game, using the new rules, using the new engines, does it feel like a Pathfinder game? That was it. That was literally the only testing goal. Provide an ordinary play experience. Here's a dungeon. Here's a bunch of monsters. Nothing, I'm not trying to push any boundaries. Nothing's trying to be too hard, except for that one damn lock that I shouldn't have put in there. I don't know which one I'm talking about.
Jason, you're just a killer GM. Your not too hard dungeon was full of severe encounters, so it wound up being pretty hard.
Yeah. Because that's why there aren't a lot of high-level characters, because they don't make it through my first-level dungeon. Jeez, Mark, I thought you would have learned that by now.
Maybe we should have had Steven write the first module for Pathfinder 2nd Edition.
Oh, you have not played one of my low levels.
I only played your high-level ones.
Yeah. Mark, Steven, and I are cut from the same cloth on that one.
Steven doesn't put incorporeals against level 1, do you, Steven?
I have.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, gosh.
Okay.
I didn't do that this time. All right. That was Crypt of the Everflame. You shush. All right.
Oh yeah.
Back in my Wizards of the Coast days, I put Mind Flayers in a first level adventure.
Why did you do
Okay.
that?
There was plenty of warning.
He was locked in a locked in a box as long as he didn't open it. All right. Anyway,
That's why Pathfinder doesn't have mind players.
that was the entire testing goal of part 1. Was just to learn the basic ropes of how the game works, learn the new action economy, learn how the ebb and flow of the game works, learn how to make characters,
Learn how to not open locks.
learn how to not open a locked door.
Because it's like for a level 3 or 4 party and it's a first level dungeon.
Learn how centipedes still suck. There were lots of lessons to be learned there, but there wasn't anything we were stress testing. That would be almost the entire rest of it, where we stress test various parts of the game. But for that first one, nope, just wanted to give you an average play experience, let you feel your way through the game. And I think our results were very positive at that. The adventure rated very highly. Most of the feedback on the adventure itself was very good. There were some, there were some struggles and complaints with various parts of the game, but there wasn't a lot that we, like, after those first weeks, and mind you, this was like the 3 weeks after Gen Con. I wouldn't say that we actually had learned much at that point in time. We were staring at the survey results going, okay, now we have a baseline.
Yeah.
That's all we were trying to do, was be like,
Yeah, it was
where's
kind of
the
affirmation of some of the stuff that's like, if this doesn't work, the whole game is screwed. I was like the action economy. If everybody's like, we hate this, we'd have been in trouble.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of just like, okay, we can at least breathe out.
Then we at least know to pack up our desks before Christmas.
I personally learned about the encounters we missed when we played through it in the office, which were all severe encounters. I was like, there's only one. There were like 3 rooms we didn't go into.
You
that were all
guys did
severe.
like walk right past them. So we play tested this whole thing internally before it got sent to the printer, and yeah, you guys did kind of walk right past all of those in the first one. Logan, why don't you talk about part 2? You wrote that one.
Yeah, so part 2 is the first one that really does have some stress testing, because it's testing out kind of the exploration system, and you can see like once it starts getting stress tested, like the ratings start to go down.
Yeah.
Which Jason will talk about more later. And so so it was kind of like, all right, there's some challenges in this. We really want to see if people can make the amount of progress we expect them to be able to. And there's like the Manticore fight, which we knew was going to be pretty hard. And 4th level was also kind of like in our math progression. It's a tough level because you don't have a lot of magic gear, but the monsters are like, we're ready for you to have some magic gear. So we knew that was going to be kind of a tricky point in the game.
And you just don't have 3rd level spells yet, too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's a lot of, it was kind of an interesting testing point. And
we also started testing like tactical terrain. Wasn't that
Yes.
the
Yeah, those
code
the
word
terrain
for it?
test,
Was the
yeah.
terrain test, despite the fact that
Yeah.
the internal code name for the game was terrain as well, which made the whole thing very
The
confusing.
tricky thing was that
which is why you had a lot of difficult terrain, climbing, and that kind of stuff for the first part, and then the latter part is a little more just dungeony.
And if I recall, we didn't actually uprate the encounters difficulty for the terrain to test to see if encounters got made hard enough by terrain that we should.
Yeah.
I think we determined that they should.
Yeah.
I think one of the most valuable things we learned from that is that we needed to adjust our encounter construction guidelines to let GMs understand that throwing entire fields of difficult terrain really does amp up the difficulty when the bad guys could fly and stuff.
It was
You
also,
shouldn't underestimate that.
It was also the first one that had several hazards in it to kind
Yeah.
of test some of those, test the complex hazard rules and some of that.
Oh yeah, we learned that quicksand people were even some of the fans who were very constructive and very, very good on the message boards with feedback was like, the one thing I hate about this, and I like everything else or dislike things, but you say you're changing it, is quicksand. You should be able to help people get out of quicksand.
Yeah.
So I think we could tell them, thanks to your feedback on part 2, you can help people get out of quicksand.
Why don't we talk about part 3? Steven,
Okay.
you want to talk about part 3? That was Amanda's.
Right.
She's not here. So.
No, she's not here. The whole goal on part 3 was basically to test the boundaries on not only healing but dealing damage with spellcasters on undead. So that was the one where basically you're all holed up in this mansion, and hordes and hordes and hordes and hordes and hordes of undead come in. We at that point in time, and it's good that we tested this, right? We were really we knew what we wanted out of the healing arts out of our various healers, the clerics. We asked you to play pretty strong healing classes from bards to clerics to paladins and whatnot. And we just wanted to make sure that that was right. We found that we were close, but not quite there. So a lot of that stress test allow us to sort of reevaluate the math, figure out exactly where certain things need to go. We knew we liked the 3-aspect part of healing and everything else.
We actually learned a lot from Magic Missile.
Yeah.
That allowed us to restructure the way we did heal.
Yes.
You guys loved that. That was one of the highest
So
rated
Magic
things in the
Missile was-
game.
So let me explain. So Magic Missile in the playtest and in the final is the same spell. We didn't change anything about it because it was universally pretty liked. It was Magic Missile, if you don't remember, is you spend 1, 2, or 3 actions to cast it, and then you get 1, 2, or 3 missiles. And no one felt bad that they could only spend 1 action, but it did mean they tended to save it for more actions. And the way heal worked was it burst out. The more actions, it was 1 action was touch, 2 action
range.
was range,
and the 3 action was everybody.
area.
But the amount you healed was the same no matter how many actions you
for
spent.
1 and 2.
For 1 and 2.
1, 2 were the same,
and then 3 was
did
reduced.
less.
And what we found was that people would, the cleric, if the cleric started next to somebody who was badly hurt, the cleric would just go and heal him 3 times. And take them from, nearly 0 to almost full.
But then run out of
But
most
then run
of the
out of
cleric's
healing
healing.
too quickly. So the whole thing
and,
was
and the funny thing is, like, one of the things we were worried about in that, particularly in chapter 3, was like the burst healing everybody and hurting all the undead. That ended up not being the
that
problem.
wasn't the
Right.
problem.
We
But
asked you
throughout
guys-
the playtest, it
one-action
was the
version.
triple heal single target.
Yeah,
So-
we asked you guys how much you did of each one in that chapter in the survey, and you told us, and it was
and
the
that's
one
when we
action
really
heal.
started realizing that the 1 action was the problem. It wasn't the 3. So we looked at Magic Missile and we said, well, Magic Missile is working, and it has a similar structure in terms of how people use it. But that is rating much more satisfactory than heal, which people are burning through way too quickly and not giving them the thing they wanted. That tied into larger discussions about heal, which I'm sure we'll come back to later, about healing outside of combat and what people felt like was appropriate pacing and all that sort of stuff. But the one thing we realized is that people wanted their heal to have oomph, but they didn't mind paying, if we applied the same structure of applying more actions to get more oomph and not just changing the range, the whole spell worked better. And all of a sudden people were saving it using, the 2 action range or the 3 action to hit everybody. The 1 became just a thing in emergency, which then meant people weren't burning 3 of them in a round.
So now 1 is heal some, 2 is heal more than before and at range, and then 3 is the same amount as a 1, but to everything in the area.
So we made it closer to the baseline about their spells, where 2 actions is where you really get the most punch out of it. But you still have the 1 action and the 3 action for special situations where it's like, I need to heal a lot of people, or I need to do something with my other 2 actions, but I'm going to heal you a little bit.
Or I move next to the guy who's dying. If he has to
stabilize.
make that check next round and fails it, he dies. I'll throw the 1 action heal at him, even though it doesn't really do much for him. It prevents him from having to make the check.
Yep.
Like, it gave us the versatility and allowed us to kind of more finely tune how many we gave you. And we got this all from the feedback, mostly on part 3 and some miscellaneous survey stuff that came later.
Because on a separate survey about clerics, you guys had said you liked the overall structure of heal, but then you gave us more detailed feedback about exactly what Jason said that you didn't like. So it's like, it's overall highly rated, but these are the quibbles. Let's make it as good as Magic Missile.
Yeah, took us a few tries, but we got it.
I think we had 4 iterations after the initial playtest, and then we finally reached it.
Yeah, the final version's
We're
dynamite.
perfectionists sometimes.
The final version, that 2 action at range heals for a D8 plus 8. And
level
for
1.
every level you put on top of it, it adds another D8 plus 8.
And there's a feat to make that
but
more.
They're limited, and they become the thing that you do in the middle of a fight to burst someone heal back up. And then we looked at out-of-combat resources to make people heal without burning, or heal up without using their spell slots.
You may have
So
heard
those
that in the
became-
updates.
It all works in concert now in a way that really feels kind of organic and natural. Let's move on to part 4. Mark?
Yeah, I ran that one on the Twitch stream, as it turned out, because Eric went to where was it? It was Comic-Con.
Yeah, and just didn't have time to prep.
Yep. I wound up running. So I'll talk about 4 and 7, which I was the understudy for all of them, and I wound up running 2 actually. So part 4 was very much an homage to the Kingmaker adventure path that even takes place on a map you can slot in exactly south of the No Man Heights map from part 3 of the adventure path, and it will fit with all of the mountains and rivers. And so it's got some hexploration, and the hexploration, so we had a sort of secondary design goal of what is it like to do hexploration? Does it feel like you're going around in Kingmaker? We even had like economy, loyalty, and stability for a while, but then changed them to things that made more sense for the adventure. But the primary goal that we were doing at the same time was something else that you guys told us about all the time on the message boards about Kingmaker, which was, well, I'm doing Kingmaker, and so we go through the woods, and then this giant monster appears, and we just alpha strike it, and then we rest because we're going through the woods, and it's one big fight each day. So that one we called, the internal goal's name was Nova Test. And it's testing what happens to the balance of the game when not only is there only one fight per day, but you kind of know that there's only one fight that day. Does that change the relative balance between a fighter and a wizard to be different than it is in the other tests?
And that's one of the reasons it's at the level it is, because you have a lot of resources by
Right,
that point.
because at first level that's kind of useless. But by the,
Asking first level characters to Nova is like, well, I cast Burning Hands, I guess we're
all right, well, Burning Hands, Magic Missile, Arcane Bond, Magic Missile. Okay.
Yeah, okay, time for napping.
Well, there we go. But you had more than enough to actually Nova. But the question was, what did it change? And we found some very interesting results. First of all, the Sea Serpent, which got added into the adventure later on, had an overpowered spine rank ability, which now is not one action. Second of all, we found out that, in fact, you guys were reporting that the Nova tests were less overpowered for the PCs just killing it and more satisfying of big boss encounters than you thought that they were in Kingmaker in the first edition, where the PCs would just kill it because they threw every resource at them. And then my favorite result, which was totally unrelated to either of our goals but just warms my heart, if you're the kind of person who just role-played in Kingmaker and befriended the kobolds and all the different weird evil races and mostly just don't fight against stuff, and you think our group's the weird group, everyone else goes into the dungeon and kills everything. Turns out that in part 4, big majority of all of the groups, whether you're an experienced player or you said you just started out with this playtest and have barely been playing, whether you hated the playtest or loved the playtest, no matter how you filter it, about 75% of groups use diplomatic means, even in some of the encounters that were unlikely, like the Cyclops, where you have to roll well or they're just going to attack you anyway. So you can know that if you like to diplomacy with the weird creatures when that's an option and you thought you were weird for that, actually your group is in the majority. So those are really the results that we got from that chapter overall.
I think that allowed us to look very closely at our mechanics on what happens when a group faces higher level monsters, harder challenges, and make sure that we weren't creating a system where, oh, this monster's 2 level higher than us, it TPKs us every time, right? There was some worry about that, right? That the way that the new crit system works, the plus minus 10, means that the more we push on one side or the other, the more they become likely to crit, the more you are more likely to fumble. So we needed to test the system to see whether or not, if you threw all your resources at it, were you able to overcome those percentage odd differences? And you were. So, I mean, it worked. It allowed us to tune the numbers a little bit more closely, I think, in final. But that was one of the most useful things I personally dug out of the data.
I think that was huge. And just learning about the role-playing, which we'll get to again when we get to Steven's adventure, which was one of the most popular, and now we know why. It told us it was important for us to be more careful and put more rules to make sure that we gave you rules that covered that role-playing area, because actually a huge number of people use that, maybe more than we thought.
So part 5.
Nothing really to say about that one.
No.
There was so much role-playing in part 5.
Part 5 was intentionally, it was called the TPK test. It was
Right.
Part 5's entire job was to TPK the party.
It wasn't if, it was when. Was the
Yeah,
test.
it wasn't. It wasn't even a. We had a 2% success rate on that. Like 2%
Really?
of tables actually beat all 9 waves, which leads me to believe 2% of judges fudged the numbers.
No, I'm pretty sure 2% of tables beat it. That's about that's about what I expected. Just you get good dice rolls against
Yeah,
the,
one in
the harder
50.
gunner.
One in
It's a
50
ball of
tables will
variance,
get a long enough string of high die rolls to wipe out some things, or happen to just pick the right character options to kind of solve the problem.
If you had good damage and a lot of elements, you had a good shot.
So,
But there is at least a small percentage. It's like if we say we got through all of this, it'll cheese Jason off.
yeah, that's
Not
right.
gonna
Yeah.
understand it.
Yeah,
Well,
that's why all those surveys results were from Stephen
Razmir.
Here's a fun story for our internal playtest, which is Jason was the wizard, and he was very carefully conserving all his spells because he's like, I'm gonna play this smart. Got dominated by the Lich, and hadn't used Quicken spell yet either. So boom, boom.
And then I was like, well, I'm dominated now. Time to unload on the party. But yeah, the entire point of that was to TPK the party. And it was fascinating to, we very carefully monitored it to find out when the parties were dying. How much punishment could high-level characters take before they collapse? And oddly enough, we got a little bit of discordant results because a lot of people, like a full 20-25% of tables died in round 2.
Round 2 was one of the 3 hardest rounds.
Was one of the harder rounds, but you were also supposed to be
Globber Zoo.
relatively fresh.
Globber Zoo.
But it just had the right suite of abilities that if you were the wrong group and didn't roll so hot, it would wipe you. And then the Demi-Lich killed everybody. I think the vast majority of tables, I think it was almost 50% died to the Demi-Lich. They would make it up to the Demi-Lich and they'd be out of resources and that thing would just smoke them.
If they passed the Demi-Lich, they usually made it to the end, where they met their end.
Yeah, where almost all the rest died. But I think what we wanted to get out of that was just kind of like, okay, these are higher level characters. Can we actually kill them? Like, I gotta be honest, there was some concern that the way the mechanics worked and the way we had some of the things set up, that maybe people don't die as often as we think they probably should if you throw really hard things at them. We didn't have anything to worry about.
It was fun.
Yeah, we can easily kill people.
So test 6.
Test 6.
That's Steve.
That's Steven.
Oh, yeah, that's mine. So test 6 was red flags. After the beating that you just got, we thought we'd give you a relative break with test 6. One of the things we wanted to make sure of was that those role-playing rules that we'd started out earlier, and things like higher level spells that tend to focus on pretty powerful divinations and the ability to sort of just bypass encounters of a more intriguing sort were working. That we could have higher level play with that kind of play style, and it wasn't just boring. We also wanted to, give you some quirky characters to interact with, because you didn't get to talk to the Demi-Lich, and we're really sorry about that.
You can talk to Abbott.
He had such a backstory.
Right, and that was right. He did. Like, he used to own a farm, and so we decided to throw you into the shackles on the smoker for Captain's Works. Party to consecrate a shrine where you got to meet all sorts of interesting people, including a contract devil, and chase down the last theorem, which was supposedly somewhere in Captain Work's vault.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was all social encounters.
A lot
right?
of it,
yeah,
social.
We wanted a thing where it's like you're really powerful and you could just start trying to smoke people, but you really can't.
Right.
It's not a good environment for that. So
It's frowned upon.
Is the game still fun?
Yeah.
If you're not just using combat abilities constantly.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's what we were trying to get at.
Plus the dungeon afterwards, just
Yeah.
to see if those
Right,
high-level effects just bypassed that whole dungeon somehow. And,
Yes.
and they didn't.
And they did, yeah. And then later on is we'd had some traps and everything before, but we wanted to have kind of an interesting series of traps and complex trap areas. Because you're higher level at that point, you've got a lot of spells at your disposal. Could you just sort of walk through all those things? Turns out, either you can't or you just didn't. Actually, in the playthrough that I did in the stream, turns out you can't. And then, of course, we punctuated it with a big thing at the end with a Kraken.
And a vault that's pretty hard to crack.
And a vault that's pretty hard to crack.
Release
so
the Kraken.
could you fend off this pretty meaty creature, get to your goal, and get out and be successful? And so in that one, we had a main goal. I think that one was more like the we were just talking about high-level role-playing, and then we were able to add some minor tests onto that one.
Yep.
And then we get to the final test,
part.
which
That's the other one I ran on the stream.
yeah. To keep it simple though, just because we're running a little.
And there
late,
wasn't that much
different
in that one because it had mostly the same goal as the first.
Yeah,
we
but on
said-
the opposite end of
Yeah,
the
we
spectrum.
said, hey,
is high level play fun?
Is it fun? Is it manageable? And does it feel like Pathfinder while also not being as weighed down and slow as high level play sometimes can get in Pathfinder First Edition? And does it break? So that was basically it. There wasn't a complex thing here, just like part one.
It was just a bunch of high level threats, and you are high level characters. If you face all them, is it fun? Is it a slog? Is it how does it work? And the funny part is we didn't really find like the total duration. Like we asked people questions every time. Like, did you think combat was too long? Did you think the adventure was too long? And we asked for just a rating on this. And it almost never really changed. That number sat almost the exact same throughout the entire playtest, even when we got to high level, which told us we were doing something right. Like there was some element of it that was working the way we wanted.
Because it was good. It was good ratings. Even among some of the people who didn't like other aspects of the games, it was generally rated quite well on how long did the combat in total take. It was about what they wanted. How long did each round take?
Yeah,
that was about what they
when we
wanted.
ran some of these through the paces, we found that internally almost all of our combats took 4 rounds. First level, 20th level, they all took 4 rounds. We actually tried to push away from that in some ways with some of the game design decisions because we thought it was a little too formulaic. But we gathered all this data. We ran everybody through this complex series of tests, which had all these different testing objectives. We asked you a whole ton of questions. And we took all that and we cross-tabbed the hell out of it. We would take the data and we would split it up by saying, okay, all the people who hated this scenario, let's isolate their data by itself and just look at it as it's compared to the norm. What about their play experience wasn't working?
They died in that scenario.
Yeah, well, that oftentimes you'd be surprised. Like, we would double cross-tab. I'd be like, all right, all the people who rated this scenario 1 star. All right, now remove all the groups that TPK'd. And now I've got a really interesting subset. Now, you can't go too far to the point where the data isn't really meaningful, but it did show us some very interesting things about a lot of different systems. And then we also got to the point where we also just asked giant questions about the game engine itself. Just asking about various parts of the game, some that we knew were going to be controversial from the beginning, and we wanted to see whether or not they would work. I would say that some of the things that we thought were going, like we had a pool of things that we were like, this is going to be controversial, this is going to be controversial, this is going to be controversial. Not all of the things that were on that
Only
list.
Resonance really was.
Not all of the things on that list were actually controversial. We were kind of taken aback by it.
The sorcerers with the different types of traditions of magic and the occult bards were 2 things. I wasn't sure that these guys would accept that. Then when they were like, this is awesome, I wasn't sure like other people at Paizo would accept that. And then when they said it was awesome, I still wasn't sure you guys would accept that. Well, now I know that 90% of you preferred it, even when we gave a list of options that included going right back to the way it was before. Like, that warms my heart.
So let's talk about some of those controversial things here just a bit. First of all, resonance, we shot it in the head, it's gone. It never did what we wanted it to do. The thing we were trying to get it to do was have a push and pull to the price of items versus your usage of items so that we could have a scaling economy. I don't want to go into all the math behind it. It's too complicated and boring. But the point is, what we were trying to do was create a competing force for how you spent your money to get magic items for your character. That's it. That was the entire point of the system. But the moment somebody was like, wait, I might be on death's door and drink a potion and not have it work and I die, I hate this system. And we get that, right? And it was a lesson, it was a thing that we suspected. And it turned out to be overwhelmingly true. So we got rid of it. We found different ways to solve those problems.
And some we said, well, we'll have to live with this problem. But people lived with it in first edition, and we've slightly reduced it.
Yeah, if we can ease it in ways, right?
It was too much of a burden to use the system, period, right?
Yeah.
So it was not.
Yeah, so
we had several replacements, and you guys told us some of you liked those replacements, some of you liked other options, but it was really mixed, and we knew that since we didn't find one that people were latching onto, that we didn't find the right one, and so that meant cut it.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing sometimes you tease out of survey data is that, wow, everyone's lukewarm about all of these things. None of these are the answer. So you go back to the drawing board. I think, we were worried that there might be some rejection of goblins as characters, but we found that while there was some reticence, the percentage was really quite small. I remember the meeting, it was like 2 years ago, when I was sitting in a room with Eric, and they were like, okay, so you're thinking about adding a new race to the game? And I was like, yeah, we were still calling it race at the time. And I was like, yeah, we're thinking about maybe orc. And, they were starting to kick that around about orcs and Galarian and stuff. And I was just like, yeah. And I just stopped the meeting and I went, wait. We're known for goblins. What are we doing? It has to be goblins. If we put orc in, the first question we're going to get is, why didn't you put goblin in? What's wrong with you? So we did.
It's also illustrative of we could look at the message boards and we could look at the surveys and see the
difference. Yeah.
Because a lot of people were a lot louder on the message boards about the goblins, where if you look at the survey results, they were much more popular there.
Yeah, and that's something we found interesting. The things that made the message board mad was not always the thing that made the survey folks upset. We would see echoes of it, but we wouldn't see nearly the kind of fervor. Some of that's just the nature of the way.
The nature of surveys in some ways.
Well, and it's the nature of how kind of message board culture works.
Oh, yeah,
sure. Too. So,
there were times
not that we discount that sort of feedback.
Yeah.
Of
course.
There's just only so much you can do.
Yeah, we considered both, but it was also easy to compare the two.
Yeah.
And there are things you could cross-tab. If you were thinking, well, I didn't like that thing Mark said, 90% of people. Well, 10% of people still didn't like it. And the one thing I cross-tab and found a huge amount of correspondence between was the people who didn't want to change paladins at all. Also didn't want almost any of the other class changes. So unfortunately, if you were in the 10% on some of those things, you may have been on the 10% for a lot of things. And and those people may have posted in every thread on the message boards that there was, and we got a lot of feedback from them there. But out of our surveys, they only submitted one survey.
Yeah. So I think we studied all that data, and there came a point in time, I think it was around November, where we started writing the giant whiteboard in my office, which I'm going to throw up a photo of it here at some point in time before I finally erase it. That just has the action list of every single thing we wanted to look at.
The entire whiteboard is filled with text about that tall. Of just everything.
There's over 100 things.
This is like a 3 foot by 4 foot whiteboard, and it is covered in text this tall.
Yeah, there are 100 things for everything from change rage to remove resonance.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
and that's 2 words. Remove resonance is, let me tell you, a lot more than 2 words worth of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of them were simple. Some of them were very, very, very complicated.
Now, I've got to warn you, when I go in and talk to Jason and give him updates, I have a bad habit of doing this with my hair on the whiteboard. So there's a section of the whiteboard you're not going to be able to read.
Yeah, there's a spot
once you get to the treasure chapter, it's
the
kind of
lower
hard to read,
left or the lower right corner is kind of wiped away.
Right. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. You won't get those spoilers.
We can reconstruct.
They're all somewhere back here. If you want to take a look.
So we learned a lot, and we took all of that to make Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Here throughout the show, we're showing it off. In the coming weeks and months, we're going to be showing it off more and more and more. We're doing Glass Cannon here. We're doing the Oblivion Oath live play. We've got a lot of other exciting things that we're going to be doing in the next few months to show off a ton of this game. And
you can play first level at the Delve.
Yeah, and you can play first level here at the show. As a matter of fact, right after this. That's where I'm going. So you can come down and play with me.
Want to give them 15 minutes of questions?
Yeah, let's open it up to questions because we've been chattering the whole time here. Let's open it up. We got 15 minutes left. Let's go questions. Go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Sam. My name is Sam. I'm known as Zerg Titan on the forums. I sort of have two questions, but I'll throw one to the side for the sake of group relations and all that. It was just about the concern of like the cure minor wounds wand spamming, but I'll leave that for you to answer later. My real concern was primarily with the Barbarian, how in the playtest, the rage powers, like the transformative ones, like turning into a giant or a dragon, it seemed a little weird because with the sort of 3 or 4 round rage mechanic, I sort of just kept imagining Amiri going throughout combat because she would literally grow huge and then for 1 round have to shrink back because of the way the rules are written. Is there something in the rules for those powers in particular where it's like for 1 round the form is maintained, just that as long as you rage the next round it's like continuous?
So you guys asked for it, and in an update, at the very least, the flying ones don't kill you when you fall. Also, rage does not last for the same amount of time as it did before.
Let's not dance around it. Rage lasts a minute now.
Okay.
So,
Jason, I didn't know what you wanted me to reveal.
Rage lasts a minute. When you're done, you're not fatigued. But you do
can't
have
rage
an
again for a while.
So, but if your combat's lasting more than 10 rounds, you're probably in trouble.
You have other issues than the fact that you became small.
And it's been rebalanced a bit so that, being kind of in rage all the time is not
We actually asked you guys, do you want to be in rage all the time and have weaker powers and be rage less of the time and have really, really strong powers, where we decided weaker powers is the same that you had. We didn't weaken them.
Yeah. From Twitch, Severin Laureate wants to know, how do wands work?
How do wands work? Hey, you got your second question anyway.
Do you want to
trying
answer
to
that,
decide
Jason?
how much of this I'm spoiling for things that I'm supposed to be spoiling later on in the show.
Right, that's the question.
You're all here.
Why don't we have
just tell them
Logan?
straight
Yeah,
up?
sure.
Logan,
Logan, go right ahead.
So,
he did the update.
in the very early stages of things, we had a few ideas for wands, and we kind of did an internal survey. It's like, what do you think of these options for wands? It's like fewer charges, but same as first edition. Use it once per day, and it doesn't get expended, that kind of stuff. And we had kind of mixed results. We're like, all right, we'll go with, and we were trying the resonance system, so we're like, we'll do something similar to classic wands, but have them cost resonance. Once resonance went away, we decided nobody's super satisfied with the stick of spells, so we're going to make a wand once per day. You can cast a spell from the wand, and you can try again, but you might break your wand forever. So wands are a lot simpler now, and they're kind of easier to cost, and we know they aren't going to be as easily spammable. You can still buy a bunch of scrolls, but those take up a lot of bulk, and so wands have been greatly simplified.
Do you want to tell them about special wands?
So that's the thing, right? There's
They'll find them.
Okay.
I'll spoil it. I got this. So one of the things that I love about it is that it opens up a lot of design space for us. The most basic one is just that. You cast it once per day, out of the stick, that's it. You get it once per day. You can try and overcast it, you might break it, you might get more. That's it. But it opens up design space for us to treat these like interesting magic items. So there are wands out there that do their thing, but then do something special on top of the spell, right? And in the future, we could do even crazier things that are like, every time you cast this spell, period, if you have this wand in your hand. We found an interesting split in our survey data about wands, that much older fans of the game didn't like the 50 charge wand, and much younger fans of the game didn't like the 50 charge wand. And it times out with like the age category
people
of people
who started
who
in
grew up
3.5
in 3 or
3.0.
3.5 thought 50 charges was the way it works. Everybody who was older than that was like, that's not how wands used to work. I don't really care how that works. And I'm pretty sure that all of the younger crowd are like, that's not how they work in Harry Potter. So,
And to be clear, when Logan said nobody wants a stick of spells, about 75% of you guys didn't want it, which surprised us. I know Jason was always saying, I think a lot of people are going to want to keep it, so let's be a little more conservative. So when you guys said you didn't want it, we said,
I just
all right.
walked in and said, yeah, fine, forget it.
Yeah, so some of those, and they're also, there's no level cap, so you can get wands of 9th level spells now,
Yeah,
because we don't have to worry about you having that 50.
Meteor Swarm.
Roll with it. Wand Meteor Swarm, that's right.
So I guess my big question is, how soon until kobolds become an option for PCs, like a fully fleshed out option?
Don't we have a standard template answer for that question?
We do.
They're not on the core rule.
And I will say this.
They're not in the core rule.
We are looking very carefully at how we are going to grow and expand this game in the coming years. I think there are a lot of obvious low-hanging fruit answers that are like, wow, it sure would be weird if they took a long time to put that out. Yeah, we think that too. So, but I'm not going to give you any dates or names or anything like that. I will say this, we're starting to plan years in advance.
Oh, screw it. I'm going to spoil it.
No!
There's a thing called the future, then.
From Twitch, Darren Caldemeyer asks, squeezing was originally 1 minute in the playtest. Has this changed in Pathfinder 2?
So to make the question clear,
Yes,
squeezing, which in the playtest is not the same as what you're used to Pathfinder 1 squeezing, where you just kind of duck your head into a smaller area. Squeezing of like, I fit into an area that's this big, took a minute in the playtest.
Yeah.
But we didn't really tell you what to do in the I'm ducking my head. In the final version of the rules, we say, if you're ducking your head, it's kind of difficult terrain. I think you're flat-footed and it's difficult terrain, and then that's it. Yeah. You don't take a -4 to attack and AC, and that's what you do. Yeah. If you are still squeezing through a space that is that narrow, it's a minute.
I was waving to someone on the internet, Darren.
Yeah, Darren.
He's always in our Twitch. Hey, Darren.
Yeah.
I have way too many questions.
Pick one.
I know.
Make it good.
Pick the one you think is going to get the best spoilers out of us.
Yeah, look at what Jason's given away so far.
I'm still debating which one. Okay, this is the one that I need to
go.
I need resolve on.
Yeah.
So, slight anecdote. During part 4, that was the TPK test, right?
5.
5 is the TPK test.
So
just all the demons.
So with the flying lich, I had a situation where one of my players, like, I rolled, oh, that didn't hit, I rolled, oh, that didn't hit, I rolled, oh, that hit, etc., etc. And one of my players was able to figure out instantaneously, oh, that thing is a level 12 monster.
Uh-huh.
How? So...
Rolling behind the screen?
Not what I'm...
Is this kind of about the monster numbers kind of being too samey? Is that kind of the...
Pretty much, as well as variation in stuff.
So, I will say this. If I could boil down the essence of your question, I think what you're trying to get at is the way that some of the stock formulas were built, you ended up with a lot of things ending up at exactly the same spot, which made some of the aspects of the game predictable. I think during the playtest, we were trying to keep that so that the numbers were more predictable. Because we were trying to test the numbers.
Right. If we don't put in the average, we don't know how the average works.
Yeah. I think we did this crazy pass through the bestiary toward the end, which we called the Sudoku pass, which involved us going through and making sure that monster numbers made sense with some of the numbers that were floating around on them. And that resulted in monsters with a lot more varied numbers. And it also allowed us to push things being like, oh, this guy's more of a bruiser, he should have a higher attack bonus, let's push that up higher, versus another monster at the exact same level, which would then have something lower. So we did address that in a lot of different ways.
Moving on to lightning round questions.
Yes.
Steve Geddes asks, what is your favorite single change from Pathfinder 1 to Pathfinder 2?
Ooh. Single favorite change.
We can't all say the action economy.
No.
So
I am going to say the
Let
action
Steven
economy.
say the action economy.
The action economy is brilliant.
For me, it's the proficiency system. The fact that whenever I say I'm a master at this, I'm trained at this, I'm an expert at this, you automatically know how to calculate it like that. It's not, oh, I better go look that up. Nobody wants to go look that up. Yeah. It's all level plus 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8.
You know, one person out there is going to...
Wait, it's not level plus 0, it's 0.
Well, it's 0, yeah, sorry. Yeah, 0 for trade.
My favorite thing is kind of a mass of things, which is like a bunch of little bonuses and penalties and various things that you had to track, and the player could calculate everything out exactly. I like how we kind of removed a bunch of kind of the little crufty ones and let the GM have a little more leeway on how they set things and determine situations.
So with the ones you guys picked, I'm going to say my favorite that is a little lower hanging that not as many people say, degrees of success. The ability to have 4 possible outcomes means that we don't have to take away your ability to win automatically or the ability for someone on a great saving throw to have nothing happen. even though those two are incredibly unfun for the spellcaster when they happen, we can put them into low probability situations and then have two fun things that happen most of the time. And having that throughout the system instead of just hodgepodge through some of the skills. It was all through PF1 where sometimes there were 4 degrees of success. It just didn't say that, and
they didn't all work the same.
They didn't all work the same.
There's two side effects of that which are really interesting, which is if you have spells or powers or abilities that have a really devastating critical failure on the save, you actually want to kind of throw those at lower level bad guys because that are lower than you, because they'll probably crit fail and get wiped off the board. It allows those characters to fill their role kind of more organically in that, oh, we're facing a ton of low level guys. Well, the spellcaster can wipe out half of those quickly. And then everybody else can go into mop-up.
Jason just took the second half of my thing. That's exactly right. Many other systems with
Taker.
You took it. Because a lot of other systems to try to get a solo monster against a party to work, a lot of mooks against the party to work, you have to have minion rules. You have to have like rules for special elite or solo monsters. We don't, and critical successes and failures are one of the main reasons why we do not.
And I will also say that on the last bit on that, it also allowed us to eventually come up with the basic save category.
Oh yeah.
Which a basic save just means nothing on a crit success. This is on a saving throw. Nothing on a crit success, half on success, full on failure, double on crit failure. And that's just what it means. So whenever you're in the book and it's like, oh, you cast this spell, it does 8d6 damage, basic fortitude. That's it. That's how short that can be now, and it means the same thing.
Jason really liked my answer. He had a lot of.
No, I took so much.
Now, in the playtest, are sort of some of the changes with the character options, say half elves, half orcs, and the like, have been condensed down now into racial and heritage options.
Yes.
Now, there was a little retooling in one of the later updates with some of the more options. How much, if any, additional tooling and playing around has gone into that, sort of working on future stuff when you're factoring in things like the elemental races and celestial things of that
We were
nature.
looking towards that.
Yeah, so there's some really exciting stuff floating around in there. First of all, the way it works is when you pick your ancestry, you now pick your heritage. That's typically some physiological aspect of your ancestry that is tied to your character. That's where all of those things live now. Your feats are generally not physiological in any way, shape, or form unless you are forced to take them at first level, in which case it's some addendum to your
They might
physiological
require
aspect.
a piece of physiology to use,
Yeah,
but they don't grow
but-
you a new
yeah.
one unless there's a reason
we got
for
rid
it.
of the thing where you're a goblin and at 5th level you suddenly grow sharper teeth. I mean, goblins are weird, but that was a bit far. Yeah, that was a bit far.
There could be a feat later on where you file your teeth.
Yeah, that's
but
fine.
That's different.
That'd be a piece of gear.
Gear and downtime.
Yeah, but it does speak to something really interesting, which is later on we do have the possibility of opening up heritages that are good for more than one ancestry.
Because remember how in Golarion, Aasimar, and Tieflings aren't only based on humans? Well, how are we
can
going to
do
do
that.
that?
We now have rules to do that without having to make 12 different variants. All right, I think.
Last question.
I think this is going to be
Lightning
the.
round, one super fast question.
Yeah. We'll keep it super quick.
What's your question?
Yeah.
So, I know you've gone through a dozen different versions of the Death and Dying rules.
Yeah,
Probably a million more after the playtest. Why did you stick with the flat checks?
So we went back and forth on whether or not to stick with the flat check quite a bit, actually, because we had the DC based on the monster for a while, and then we had a flat check. And fundamentally what it came down to was we wanted to make sure that the moment when your character went down, you felt that surge of adrenaline, that everybody at the table perked up and paid attention. And we didn't think that the payoff for having to have a number that you have to look up, that you have to keep secret, that is all this separate thing, was really worth it. It wasn't doing the work we wanted it to do. Whenever we were talking about game mechanics and how we do them, it's always about adding complexity for value, right? So if we're going to add complex things to the game, we want to make sure they're doing the work we're putting them in to do. Because if they're not, they just make the game harder for no good goddamn reason. So we really do work hard to make sure that is the way that works. And in this case, that number wasn't doing anything for us other than making the game hard. So yeah, that's fundamentally why we went with flat check, and it is what we kept. But we really liked Yeah, ish. I would say we really liked the evolution that ended up happening where you go down and you gain dying and then you come back up, but you have the wounded condition. So if you go back down again, you get much, much closer to dead. And it really forces people to play differently, which is what we need. And this is going to be that's it. All right.
Okay.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. We really do appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great PaizoCon.
Bye, everyone.
See you all next time.